So with that, though, I'm going to transition to our next speaker is Pam Matson. I could spend a long time introducing Pam. I go with Paula, even longer with Pam because of the longer legacy in there. So I'll just say a few brief things for those that don't know. Pam was Dean of the School of Earth for 15 years. She saw it go from low 40s faculty up to a little over 65 faculty, so a big, big change. Also change in amplification and directions, if you will. She's a member of the National Academy of Sciences. She's had a huge influence in steering the academies on a number of different studies. She's also on a huge number of boards I could go through, but I really want to go back to when I first showed up at Stanford. She was running this big interdisciplinary program in Yaqui Valley, Mexico that was funded by the Packard Foundation. And it was a long-term study with lots of different aspects. And it was really kind of started the hallmark of my view of sustainability. And she wrote a book on it called The Seeds of Sustainability. And I think it's arguable that she's not only a leader in sustainability, but she really pulled and pushed people around the world into the view of studying sustainability, of defining sustainability, and really moving it forward. She also has a more recent book called Pursuing Sustainability. And so with that, I think there's no better person than to hear from on terms of directions and sustainability than Pam. So.
Oh, Scott, thank you very much for that incredibly kind introduction. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I would like to talk today about scale, also about linking knowledge and action. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about some of my transformation. And I'm going to start with a reminder for some of you that I was a trained biogeochemist. I started my career working on this incredibly interesting set of questions about why was the global system changing. Back in the 80s, we did not know why greenhouse gases were increasing in the atmosphere. We didn't know what was driving land use change. And I was so lucky to be able to be a scientist working in that area and making discoveries about what was happening, understanding what was happening. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky. And then all of a sudden I woke up one day and said, oh my God, this is terrible. This is not good for, my kids if I ever have them, or for anyone else around the world. And switched my research almost immediately, or at least part of my research, from being focused on understanding what was going on to trying to help find solutions, so use-inspired. Now, I will say, I believe the research on both of those ends was fundamental research. I was making discoveries. I was learning new things, contributing to scientific understanding. But I was also able to work with other scientists, other disciplines, and lots of decision makers in trying to figure out ways of doing things better to meet the needs of people, but also to protect the life support systems of the planet. And that experience really was very foundational for me, as Scott said. The definition of sustainability that came out of it for me is this one. It's about intergenerational well-being of everybody, inclusive. But it's also true that we can't do that without protecting and sustaining the life support systems of the planet. Now, there's a lot of us working on this right now, lots and lots of people in this university, around the world, in corporations, in NGOs, in government agencies, in academia, and we're working hard on that goal together. So I think we might want to ask, how well are we doing? How well are we pursuing sustainability here? So on the well-being side, the answer is, wow, we are making some progress. And I could give you lots of different indicators of that. But probably the best thing to look at is just this lifespan figure that shows that around the world, lives have been extended. People are living longer. The top line is Northern Europe, now living an average of 81 years. The bottom line is Sub-Saharan African nations, now living an average of 61 years. So you can see the real problem here. There's a huge disparity between the world's richest and the world's poorest countries, even though we are all getting better as we go. And there's lots of other data, lots of other indicators that there's still a lot of people whose needs are not being met, who we are not meeting the goal of well-being for. What about on the life support system side? Well, here, the story is not even that good. And I'm using a figure here to show that. This was the first part of that up to about 1995, actually, was reported in a paper that Peter Vitousek and many others wrote. Back at a time in the 90s when we were all writing papers, waving the red flags, saying, my God, we've got to watch out for this. This is what's happening. And we thought maybe by saying that we could change the trajectory. But as you can see there, we have not changed it. It's continuing to increase carbon dioxide, anthropogenic nitrogen, et cetera, et cetera. And there are lots of other data points right now that support that. This is proportion of population exposed to lethal heat, sea level rise, loss of biodiversity, coral bleaching events becoming more common, et cetera. So I think we have to ask ourselves, why aren't we making more progress? Even though we're all working on this, why aren't we making more progress? Now, we could spend the whole rest of the day discussing this and arguing about the answer to it, and there's tons of answers and some really interesting papers being written on the question. But I'm going to just take sort of one fundamental point and make here first, and that is that I think one reason is it's really hard. Sustainability challenges are playing out in complex adaptive systems, complex social and environmental systems where there's lots of moving parts. And we can take one intervention and think that this is really going to make a difference. But if we don't get all the other interventions and all the other parts of the system lined up, it's not going to do anything. Or we could make an intervention that actually makes everything worse in another area that we care about. So it's hard. And I think we need to have recognize this and have a systems approach in mind as we work. This is something I think we as researchers need to do. This is what the world needs to do. This is what we need to teach our students. And we are. I'm teaching at least 2 courses on systems approaches for sustainability. And I think it's a critical thing to have in the back of our minds so that we know how to intervene, or at least we know what to watch for. But the other answer that I have is just directed at us in the research community. And I think this is true. I think we could do a better job than we're doing right now in working to link trusted knowledge with action, with decision making, and also to help that scale. So let me talk about those 2 things really quickly. First of all, linking knowledge and action is an area that we've done a lot of research on, I've been involved in. We know something about what works, what doesn't, and why, so I'm going to share a few of those points. One is that a lot of us have in the back of our minds a pipe model, where here we are in academics environments carrying out research we think is going to be useful. And then, writing a paper that says, here, this is what we've learned, and the last paragraph says, and by the way, decision makers should do these things. Or we might say, oh, we've got a web-based model, and it's accessible to anybody. And it ends there. So we send it into the pipe, it comes out on the other end, and sometimes the users aren't there at all. Sometimes they weren't actually asking the same question we were asking. And sometimes we've only given them one tiny piece of what they need to know to develop solutions. So what do we do instead? Forget that, and instead realize that for trusted knowledge that we can link to decision making, it has to be a collaborative activity. It has to be done together. And we've done this at Stanford already. The Woods Institute's Uncommon Dialogues are an example of that. The affiliates programs are in some ways an example of that collaborative effort. And the institutes have had lots of other opportunities for us to begin working in that area. I think we have to do a lot more, and we have to move into what is now known as convergence research or transdisciplinary research, at least in part of what we do. Second point is one I made before. We need systems of innovations, not just one-offs, not just one new gadget or widget or whatever, but a system of those. We need to actually do the supply chain of pieces of information that are needed for people to actually make use of our knowledge. And the institutes and the school could do that. Third one is we have to realize we're working in a rapidly changing world, and we better be adaptive. We'd better be humble enough to say, we didn't get that right, let's make a change. And then finally, boundary spanning functions help. And this is something that showed up all the time in the research, that systems that were successful at linking knowledge and action were aided by boundary spanning organizations or individuals who really coordinated and translated between the different cultures working together in this collaborative research environment. Also, we learned that we have to invest in it. It doesn't just happen accidentally. Now, the accelerator is one of our investments in that, and I think the Institute's linking knowledge and action can also play a part in that. I think we just have to be really clear about what we're asking them to do and make sure we have the right kind of people to be those boundary spanners. And it's not often us, I'll tell you. Okay, a few words about scale. For those of us in the research community, I think, I should say, first of all, there's tons of research on how to scale innovations, how to scale technologies, how to scale projects or programs that work well in development and so forth. So I want to turn this more directed to us and ask the question, what could we do differently? Are there things that we could do differently to help scaling happen? And I have a couple of ideas, but I'll share with you. But one, first of all, I want to say there's sort of assumptions buried under here that we should make clear. If we want to scale, we have to create tools, approaches, knowledge, whatever, that is scalable, that can be generalizable. And if we don't, our intentions just won't come through. And something that isn't so obvious is that it probably makes sense to identify scaling pathways and partners at the beginning of the research if we intend to scale it, if we want our knowledge to be helping in scaling. Who's going to help us carry it to the next steps? All right, so Stanford has certainly already started in these areas, and there's lots of examples. I'm going to only show a couple, so apologies to those of you in the room who are doing it, and I'm not talking about your work. This is one that Peter Vitusik and I have been doing, partnering with a team at the Chinese Agricultural University for the last 10 years or so. And what we're trying to do is both develop great science, develop new kinds of cropping systems that increase yields and decrease the environmental consequences of agriculture, and have it tested and piloted in all places around China. So incredible effort. But also engage and teach local users how to use those new technologies. So that's a different scale. And at the same time, this group has the ability to influence national policy, and in fact has, in terms of new laws that regulate the amount of nitrogen that can be applied in agriculture in China. So joining together, I guess, in a collaborative team where you can intervene at a number of levels helps you scale. Another one, really something a lot of us do, is interact with networked organizations like CIMMYT, the International Maize and Wheat Research Institute, where many of us have developed or helped develop new approaches or tools or whatever that are using their sort of home base. But then those tools and approaches, if they work and can be proven, are taken out to the rest of the world where CIMMYT works, and that they do the scaling. Gretchen Daly's NatCap project, by the way, is the same kind of thing, where they're using the networks of the World Wildlife Fund and the Nature Conservancy and others to help spread their technologies. Another example, working with corporations. Now, the shortcut on this particular slide is, speaking as somebody who's interested in agricultural commodities, if I wanted to work with companies to do a better job of growing those commodities, I could go out and try to meet with the billions of producers out there who do it. Or I might want to be trying to influence behavior and get consumers to use consumer power to modify the system, and I could go try to interact with consumers all over the world. But the easiest way to do this is to engage with that handful of companies that control trade in those commodities around the world, 90% of the trade. This is a World Wildlife Fund approach that actually makes a lot of sense. And I have seen university researchers engaging in that way, directly with NGOs and with government-NGO partnerships. I should also say that Eric Limbaugh and Jim Leap have written a really interesting paper on how to scale using those kinds of collaborations. And then finally, engaging with government efforts. Lots of us, lots of you engage directly with government agencies. You provide advice, you provide analyses. You are scaling your knowledge because you're working with governments. But Rosemary Knight has a fabulous example of how individual researchers and research teams can use, develop, apply technologies and knowledge that they already have in hand to help address really critical challenges that are being put in place by government regulations for sustainability. And she next month, I think, is going to talk about her project. So you got to hear it. It's just fantastic. So those are just a few of the examples. And I just want to end by saying, I think we have a great opportunity, and we have a great opportunity because of this new school, and also because of all of the experience that's already been bubbling under what we've been doing. We can invest to ensure that our knowledge is trusted, is useful, is usable, and actually used by decision makers. We can do that. We can create new knowledge tools and approaches that are scalable, and we can identify pathways and partners for scaling as part of our designing of our research process. And I think if we do that, we really do have a chance, an opportunity to make transformative change for sustainability. So thank you.